Okay, Shabbat Tov, everyone. Back to the exciting story of King Shaul and his bizarre and violent behavior. We left it off last time as follows. Quick recap. David is running away from Shaul. He goes to a place called Nov, which is a city of priests. There is a man there who's in charge of the priest called Achimelech, and David asks him for food. He says, "I've got no food. I've only got this holy bread, and you can't have that." And David says, "Well, I want it anyway," and he takes it, and he takes Goliath's sword. And there is somebody in the background watching, the pantomime villain called Doeg. Doeg is there and he sees what goes on. And Doeg goes back and reports back to Shaul that Achimelech has helped David. And Shaul is in one of his paranoid states, and he rails against his servants for not supporting him, and he rails against Achimelech for helping his enemy. Now, if you help the enemy of the king, you are called a mored b'malchut, you're called a rebel, and you are liable to the death penalty. And so this is what happens over here. Let's go to the screen. Verse 13, Jeffrey, chapter 22.
And actually, I thought we were further along. But anyway, Saul said to him, "Why did you organize against me, you and the son of Jesse, by giving him food and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he could arise and ambush me as clearly as this day?" As clearly, by the way, is in brackets. Ahimelech answered the king and said, "Who amongst all your servants is as trustworthy as David? He is the king's son-in-law, obeys your bidding, and is honored in your household. Did I begin today to inquire for him of God, it would be sacrilegious for me," in brackets, to betray the king. "Let the king not accuse his servant or my father's entire household of anything, for your servant did not know anything small or great about all of this." But the king said, "You must die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." The king then said to the footmen who stood about him, "Surround and kill the Kohanim of Hashem, because their hand is also with David, and because they knew that he was fleeing and did not inform me." But the servants of the king were not willing to send forth their hand to slay the Kohanim of Hashem.
Okay, stop there. That's where we got to last time. So the king says to Achimelech says, "I didn't do anything wrong. I thought that David was your right-hand man. And anyway, I've been inquiring of God on his behalf for months. This is nothing new. And I haven't done anything wrong." The king is not interested, and he says, look carefully at what he says in verse 16. Again, Jeffrey, for us 16, please.
But the king said, "You must die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house."
Okay, so who has he condemned to death now?
He's condemned to death Ahimelech and his children, his sons, and all his family.
And all his family. Okay, right. So Achimelech and all his family are to be put to death. A bit harsh, you would say, because if anyone was guilty of anything, which is hard to say, but even if you were to say there was somebody guilty, who is it? It's Achimelech. His sons haven't done anything wrong. And his father's household haven't done anything wrong. So that's a bit harsh. But you'll see it gets worse. So, verse 17 tells us that these very brave footmen of his defied the king's instruction. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. The king's servants would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord, which is very interesting, because who do the Kohanim represent?
Well, they were the religious leaders. They were the priests, and
so they represent God, right? They represent God. They're God's representatives.
They were the conduits between them and the people.
Correct. They were the conduit. So they, as it were, excuse me, represent the holiness of God. Now, what's interesting is that these people, despite the fact that they were putting themselves in mortal danger by disobeying the king, disobeyed the king. And the reason that they disobeyed the king was not because they thought the king was wrong or right. That's not for them to say. But they were not willing to, as it were, kill God's representatives, which tells you that in their mind, Hashem, God, Kadosh Baruch Hu, whatever you want to call this holiness, was higher than the king. And it gives us an idea of the level at which the king was held. Remember, this is the first king of Israel. Remember, back in chapter 8, Shmuel said, it'll be bad for you with a king. We went through it last week, remember? He's going to take your lands. He's going to take your children. They're going to be footmen. They're going to be runners. There's that word ratzim. We talked about it last time. They're going to be becoming runners. It ain't going to be great if you have a king. That's what Shmuel said. You'll regret it. And here, these people are defying the king. And in some ways, they are a testament to Shmuel's statements back in chapter 8 that the king, it's not going to be great if you have a king. Shmuel was against having a king. And of course, it's all very apropos because in yesterday's parasha, we learned about the whole episode of what you're meant to do if you have a king. Because in yesterday's parasha, it tells us what a king has to do. He's not allowed to have too many horses, not allowed to have too many wives, not allowed to have too much money. We've gone through this on many occasions in chapter 17 of Devarim in yesterday's parasha. The king is not God. And these people, his servants, were not prepared to go against and kill the servants of God, as it were, the Kohanim, on behalf of the king. So, who's the one that's going to do it? Verse 18, Jeffrey.
So the king said to Doeg, you circle around and slay the Kohanim. Doeg the Edomite circled around and he killed the Kohanim. On that day, he killed 85 men, wearers of linen robes. And
okay, stop there. So who does the king turn to? He turns to Doeg to do it. Why did he turn to Doeg?
Because he wasn't Jewish.
Ah, that's the first thing. Yeah. Yes, Johnny?
He was the informer who told
he was the informer. Both of those things are right. Doeg was an Edomite. And according to some opinions, he was an Edomite convert. So according to other opinions, he was an Edomite who was not a convert. He was not a Jew. So if he's not a Jew, then he's not interested in the Kohanim of the Jewish God. He doesn't care about killing the Kohanim. So that's number one, what Jeffrey said. And what Johnny said is absolutely right. He's up to his neck, Doeg, because he's in a bit of trouble, because only now has he informed the king about Achimelech's apparent treachery. So you can imagine the king saying to Doeg, why have you only just telling me this now? why didn't you come straight back from this episode and tell me that Ahimelech is supporting David? I'd have gone and sorted it out straight away. Now David's got away. I've got some serious doubts about your loyalty to me, Doeg. So Doeg is in a very weak position. So the king knows he's in a weak position. Doeg knows he's in a weak position. So the king says, right, Doeg, you have to do it. Nobody else is going to do it. You do it. So he turns round and he kills 85 men, wearers of the linen ephod. What are they talking about there? The linen ephod?
Ephod's the apron that they wore. The apron.
Yeah. They were part of the big day kahuna. They were part of the priestly garments. So that's just a way, a sort of poetic way of saying that he killed 85 Kohanim. Now,
did 85 have to serve? Was that a number? Or was that just how many happened to be there?
Well, that's how many he killed on that day. Who was he told to kill? Ahimelech and all his father's household. Now, maybe 85 people were his father's household. Verse 19, Jeffrey.
No, 85 wore the apron. They were Kohanim.
Yeah, but maybe they were all Ahimelech's brothers and nephews, and they were all Kohanim.
Right. So Ahimelech was the Kohen as well.
Yeah, Ahimelech was the chief Kohen.
Chief Kohen, okay.
So maybe those 85 men were his father's household. And maybe you could argue that those 85 men, by killing those 85 men, Doeg has fulfilled the king's command, because that's what he was told to do. He was told, Ahimelech, you must die. Where is it? There, verse 16. You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's household. So verse 18, you can say, was Doeg fulfilling the command of the king. But look what happens in verse 19, Jeffrey.
And Nov, the city of Kohanim, he killed by the blade of the sword, man and woman alike, child and suckling alike, ox, donkey, and sheep. One son of Ahimelech.
Hang on, stop there, sorry. End of 19. So what did he do? He killed the 85 Kohanim, and then he went on a killing spree in the city of Nov. He killed men, women, infants, sucklings, oxen, asses, lambs, everything he killed. Can you find for me a commandment from the king to Doeg to do that? No, because there wasn't one. So what did Doeg do in effect? He went over and above that which he was told to do. He was told to kill Ahimelech and his father's household. And he killed the entire city. Now, the language here is very, well, before we go into that language, Doeg was a very violent man. We can see that. There is a parak of Tehillim, of Psalms, which mentions Doeg's bloodiness. Anybody know where it is? Not something which is particularly well known. It's not in Hallel or anything. I'll show it you on the screen now. It's chapter 52. Lamnatseach maskil leDavid. It's on the screen. Jeffrey, you want to read it for us?
For the conductor, a maskil of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul, and said to him, David came to the house of Ahimelech. Why do you boast of evil, you mighty man? God's kindness is constant. Your tongue plots destruction as a sharpened razor, working deceit.
Stop there. What's he talking about there? This is David writing a psalm, and he's, as it were, speaking to Doeg. the Edomite. What is verse 4? Your tongue plots destruction as a sharpened razor, working deceit. What's that referring to?
Well, it says he's telling Saul the incident and going on to kill Ahimelech and then kill the whole city.
Okay, so at the moment, we're talking about his tongue, and you're right. This is that your tongue plots destruction as a sharpened razor, working deceit, means that your mouth, the fact that you went and informed the king that Ahimelech had done something which he had not done. Ahimelech had not done anything wrong. And you painted it in such a way that Ahimelech was seen as a rebel and therefore worthy of the death penalty. Your tongue, working deceit, because it wasn't true, has plotted destruction. So that verse there in Tehillim is referring to Doeg's dobbing in of Ahimelech. Now, verse 5.
You loved evil more than good, falsehood more than speaking righteousness forever. You loved all destructive words, a deceitful tongue.
Okay, stop there. So what David is saying here, because he doesn't then go on to talk about him killing the priests, he only talks about his deceitful tongue. So what David is actually saying here is that everything begins with a deceitful tongue. Had Doeg not spoken deceitfully and wrongly and badly about Ahimelech, none of this would have happened. So what was the cause of the massacre in Nov?
Lashon hara.
Lashon hara. Actually, worse than that, Motzi Shemra.
Yeah.
Motzi Shemra. Lashon hara is true. Motzi Shemra is something which is not true. So here's an example of, we say that Motzi Shemra is like killing a person. If you say something bad about somebody and it's not true, you kill their reputation. Here's an example where it actually led to their physical death as well as the death of their reputation. So this pasuk in Tehillim is referring to our story here. This Tehillim in 52. So let's just go back now and have a look again. Verse 19 for us again, Jeffrey, please, in our chapter 22.
And Nov, the city of Kohanim, he killed 85 men, whereas he killed by the blade of the sword, man and woman alike, child and suckling alike, ox, donkey, and sheep.
Okay, now, have you heard those words or very similar words before? The obvious answer is?
I've read about them.
The obvious answer is yes, you have heard them. Otherwise, I wouldn't be asking you the question. Now, the next question is, where have you heard very, very similar language?
Amalek.
So
Very good, Jeffrey. Very good. Let's go back to chapter 15. Chapter 15 is the story. We've done this, of course. Chapter 15 is the story of Shmuel telling Shaul to go and kill Amalek. Okay? Have a look at read verses 1, 2, and 3, Jeffrey, on the screen.
And Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you to be king over his people, over Israel. And now hearken to the voice of the words of the Lord. So said the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him on the way when he came up out of Egypt. Now go, and you shall smite Amalek, and you shall utterly destroy all that it is his. And you shall not have pity on him, and you shall slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass.
Okay, now let's just have a look at this. Man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Back to our verse 19 here on chapter 22. It's back on the screen. Man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and ass, and lamb. One is missing from our pasuk.
Oh,
Well, lamb is a sheep, Michael.
it's a cow, ox and grass and lamb. A donkey.
Donkey.
No, donkey's an ass.
And lamb.
It said camel.
Yes, Anita's got it. It said
That's
camel. Well
yeah.
done. There we go. Ox and sheep, camel and ass. Okay, the only one that we don't have in our pasuk is camel. Other than camel, this is an exact copy. Now, what do you think the author of Shmuel Aleph is telling us by using the, first of all, why is camel not mentioned here?
Maybe they didn't have camels in that area.
Yeah, exactly. Amalek were what kind of people?
No.
Desert people.
They were nomadic desert people.
Yeah.
They lived in the desert. Nov is a
All the more
city.
reason to have a camel.
Yeah, so in Amalek, they had camels. In Nov, they didn't have camels. It's a city. So that's why in Nov, it doesn't mention camels, because they didn't have any. Whereas with Amalek, over here in chapter 15, they did have camels because they were a nomadic people. So what do you think the author of Shmuel Aleph is trying to tell us by using the almost exact words here?
Telling him to finish the job, because he didn't finish the job with Amalek, I don't think.
Okay, you're absolutely right that he did not finish the job. He was told to finish the job with Amalek, and he didn't do it. So this is, if you like, making it all the more terrible what he's done. What he's done is he has destroyed the city of Nov utterly and completely. Doeg has done it. We have to assume, I think, that even though it's not written, Shaul told him to do this, because he wouldn't have done it otherwise, or maybe he would. But anyway, through his command, through Shaul's command, the city of Nov, inhabited by the priests of the Lord, have been utterly wiped out. In contrast to Amalek, who the Lord told him to utterly wipe out, and he didn't do it. So it's telling you that is using that language to bring back another major sin of Shaul. And what's very interesting is that when you read in various places about the sins of Shaul, and there were quite a few, this destruction of the city of Nov is not mentioned explicitly, and it's really surprising. So let's have a look. So, for example, in chapter 28 of Shmuel Aleph, which we'll come to in due course, you have
Rabbi Shanshouse writes a nice paragraph at the bottom of the page on this about.
Read it to us, Johnny.
There were many positive sides to Saul's multifaceted personality. However, in this case, his insanity caused him to commit an act of extreme fanaticism. Ironically, part of his tragedy was that until the final day of his life, he was surrounded by faithful servants who would fulfill his misguided orders and fight for him. This incident of Nov also exposes another paradoxical dimension of Saul's character. The same individual who was reluctant to destroy Amalek completely despite their unwavering hatred for the Jewish people, did not hesitate to eliminate Ahimelech and his family, as well as all the priests of the city of Nob. Indeed, the wording of the verse, both men, women, children, suckling babes, oxen, donkeys, and sheep, is reminiscent of the unfulfilled command with regards to Amalek. Put to death both men and women, both infants and suckling babes, both oxen, sheep, both camels and donkeys, etc. So it's just saying exactly what you've been saying, more or less.
Okay, now what's interesting about that? We'll talk a little bit about that now. So there's this comparison, this paradox, that as Rabbi Steinsaltz calls it. On the one hand, you've got Shaul, who says, I'm going to have mercy on Agag. Remember, we spoke about that. He was merciful on Agag. He didn't want to kill him. But he's got no mercy on this lot whatsoever. And there's a Gemara in Masacre Yoma, which says that Shaul said at the time when he was told to kill Amalek, he says, and it was in this week's Sedra. How did we finish this week's Sedra? What was the last subject in this week's Sedra? I think it was the last subject. David will correct me if I'm wrong. Egla Arufa. Yeah, what happens with the Egla Arufa? We've learnt it in Sanhedrin. Somebody is found dead on the way in between two cities. They have to measure the distance between the two cities, and the one that's the nearest city has a responsibility to do this ceremony with the Egla Arufa, a calf that has to have its neck broken, to demonstrate their culpability in this unsolved murder. Okay, remember that? We learned it in Sanhedrin, and remember there was one opinion, I can't remember who it was now, Yaakov was one of the names, Rabbi Yaakov ben somebody or other, who wanted the whole shebang, the king, the whole 71 Sanhedrin, the whole lot of them, and the Kohen Gadol, all to go and measure this distance. Anyway, that's what we learned in Sanhedrin. So Shaul says, if you have to bring an Egla Arufa for one murder that they didn't even do, that they just might be connected with, wow, what a responsibility I'm going to have if I kill all these people. And the Gemara says, a heavenly voice came forth, a bass coil came and said, don't be so from, don't be so righteous, right? Kadosh Baruch Hu's giving you a command, don't you be more from than God, right? And then when he said to Doeg, go and kill all the Kohanim, the same bat call came out and said, don't be so wicked. This is a Gemara. So this is Shaul. This is the extreme of Shaul. He's a fanatic, as Rabbi Steinsaltz calls him. He's a fanatically from when he doesn't want to kill Agag because he feels sorry for him, knows better than God. And he's fanatically evil when he orders Doeg to kill all the Kohanim for no reason at all. So that paradox there that Rabbi Steinsaltz talks about is spoken about in the Gemara in Masachet Yoma. Now, what I was saying is that surprisingly, this business of killing the priests in Nov is not mentioned in the places, and there's a couple of places in Tanakh where Saul's sins are listed. So, for example, if we look on the screen here, I've turned to chapter 28. If you look in verse 17 first, no, verse 16 to 18, Jeffrey.
And Samuel said, and why do you ask me when the Lord has turned away from you and has become, in brackets, the supporter of your adversary? And the Lord has done to him as he spoke by me, and the Lord has torn the kingdom from your hand and has given it to your fellow, to David. Because you did not listen to the Lord's voice, and you did not execute the fierceness of his wrath against Amalek, therefore The Lord has done this thing to you this day.
Okay, stop there. So Shmuel, this is, by the way, Shmuel speaking from the grave. We'll get that to it when we come to chapter 28. Shmuel tells it very clearly. Why did Saul lose the kingdom? Not because he killed the priests of Nov, but because he didn't fulfill the word of God in killing Amalek, in wiping out Amalek, which is interesting and surprising.
So why didn't he lose it? Why didn't he lose it then?
Well, he did lose it then. Only it was because at that time. Remember, the cloak is torn, and Shmuel says to him, "That's it. God has torn the kingdom from your hand." Only later did it actually come to pass, but that was the point at which it was decided. But interestingly, when Shmuel is called from the dead to give testimony as to why Shaul was punished, he doesn't mention Nov. And in the account of Shaul's death, when we read of Shaul's death in Sefer Divrei Hayamim, in the book of Chronicles, there it is of on the screen. We've got it here. Let's have a look. Verse 8 onwards, Jeffrey.
And it came about on the morrow that the Philistines came to strip the slain, and they found Saul and his sons lying on Mount Gilboa. And they stripped him and carried off his head and his weapons. And they sent throughout the land of Philistines all around to bring the news to the priests of their idols and to the people. And they deposited his weapons in the temple of their gods, and his skull they impaled in the temple of Dagon. And all of Jabesh Gilead heard all that the Philistines had done to Saul. And all the valiant men arose and carried off Saul's body and the bodies of his sons and brought them to Jabesh. And they buried their bones beneath the oak in Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. And Saul died because of the treachery that he had committed against the Lord, concerning the word of the Lord that he did not keep, and also because he had inquired of the dead spirits.
Okay, stop there. Okay, just finish off the last verse. Go on.
And he did not inquire of the Lord, and slew him, and transferred the kingdom to David, the son of Jesse.
So there in the book of Chronicles is a summary of Saul's death and why he died. And again, the killing of the priests of Nov is not mentioned. Now, I would have thought that was a pretty bad thing, to go and kill an entire city of priests and everyone else in the city. But it's not mentioned. And what's interesting is that the Radak picks up on that. He gives, for me, what is a rather unsatisfactory answer, but I'll tell you what it is anyway. According to the Radak, this Shaul's sin is not mentioned because these priests were liable for the death penalty anyway, owing to their own sins. So I think it's a bit schwach, that. And then he goes on to say that the death of Saul and his sons by the Plishtim was a punishment for the killing of the priests of Nov and their sons. But I don't buy that either, because Jeffrey has just read the reason that he died in Divrei Hayamim is not because he killed the priests of Nov, because he did not keep the word of Hashem with regard to Amalek. So I don't know where the Radak gets either of those two explanations from. I think it's a bit schwach personally, but there you go. That's the Radak. Okay, now let's just go back to our chapter 22 and let's finish off the chapter and then talk about the content of the end of the chapter. So verse 20.
One son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, His name was Abiathar, escaped, and he fled to David. Abiathar told David that Saul had massacred the Kohanim of Hashem. David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day that Doeg the Edomite was there, and that he would certainly inform Saul, I am responsible for every life of your father's house. Stay with me and fear not, for the man who seeks my life seeks your life as well. You are safe with me.
Okay, very, very interesting. Johnny, who was Evyatar?
Itzik Drucker's son.
Correct. Itzik Drucker's son is called Evyatar. Okay, Evyatar here is the son of Achimelech, and he escaped. Interesting, isn't it? What happened with Amalek?
Somebody escaped, didn't they? The king.
The king,
escaped.
Agag.
Yeah.
Well, he was spared, but he didn't get killed. Isn't it interesting that here also one person didn't get killed, and it turns out that it's the son of Achimelech, Evyatar. So Evyatar escapes, and of course, your enemy's enemy is your friend. Saul is the enemy of Nov because he wants to kill everybody. Saul is the enemy of David, so he flees to David because he knows that David and Saul are enemies. So he goes to David and he tells David that what Shaul has done. And what does David say? And this is the greatness of David HaMelech. This is the greatness of David HaMelech here, and later on when we see with the sin that he does with Bathsheba, the greatness of David HaMelech is what?
He admits responsibility.
He admits responsibility. This is the major midah that we learn from David HaMelech. David HaMelech was clever. He worked out how to kill Goliath. He was a great musician. He could play the harp. He was a wonderful poet. He wrote many of the Tehillim. He was a great warrior. He expanded the boundaries of Israel, and he was a very popular king. None of those things are the most important thing about David HaMelech, which makes him a hero to the Jewish people. What makes David the hero to the Jewish people is this pasuk, these two psukim, 22 and 23, and later on when he admits responsibility for his sin with Bathsheba, at which point he says, Chatati, I have sinned. Here he says, read it again for us, Jeffrey, 22 and 23.
David said to Abiathar, I knew on the day that Doeg the Edomite was there, and that he would certainly inform Saul. I am responsible for every life of your father's house. Stay with me.
Go on.
Stay with me and fear not, for the man who seeks my life seeks your life as well. You are safe with me.
Yeah. So your enemy is my enemy. So he says, I knew on that day that Doeg the Edomite was there. In Hebrew, Vayoma David le'Evyatar, Yadati Vayomahu. Now this shows that David was actually acting recklessly, because if he knew on that day that Doeg was there, and he knew, and it says here in a double expression, Ki haged yagid l'Shaul. What's the root of that word, haged yagid? Yes, Johnny, aren't you muted?
Haggadah, is it?
Yes, Haggadah. And does the Haggadah do?
Tells the story.
Lahagid.
Tells the story.
Lahagid baboker chastecha ve'emunatcha baleilot. Where do you have that word, lahagid?
Definitely.
you're not careful, I'll sing it for you. Come on, it's on the tip of your tongue. Give you a clue. You said it 2 days ago and yesterday. You sang it 2 days ago and you said it yesterday. Mizmor shir leyom hashabat. Yeah. Hakid baboker chastecha, to say in the mornings about your kindness, ve'emunatcha baleilot, and your faithfulness at night. Lahakid means to tell. Here it's a double expression. David says, I knew on that day that he was there, and I jolly well knew he was going to tell Shaul. And I am
Robert Steinsaltz adds, and I should have anticipated that.
That's the point. That was my next question.
Oh, sorry.
So if he knew that Doeg was going to go back and inform to the king, what should he have done?
Should have told him not to.
Well, there's lots of things he could have done. There's lots of things he could have done. He could have
killed Doeg.
He could have killed Doeg. Yeah, that would have been a bit drastic.
Yeah.
He
Let
could have killed Doeg.
Avimelech know to just beware what's going to happen.
He could have let Achimelech know. Yes, he could have done that. What else could he have done? He could have stopped doing what he was doing. He could have gone back and on his request and said to Achimelech, look, I don't want to get you into any bother here. I don't want your bread. I don't need your sword. I don't want you getting involved in my messy business. He could have done that. Or he could have gone to Doeg and he could have said, Doeg, I know you're going to go back and tell the king, but I want you to know that Achimelech has done nothing wrong. Right? It's not Achimelech that's. So there's lots of things he could have done. Michael Krause's solution is probably the most. I was going to say the most final solution, but that wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah.
Would be the most effective solution, and that would be to kill Doeg. But whatever he did, well, he didn't do anything, did he? He didn't do anything. That's the point. And Rav Steinsaltz is right by saying he should have anticipated. He knew. Haged Tagid, Haged Yagid. He's certainly going to tell. I knew he was going to tell. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Well, you being an idiot has cost the lives of the entire city of Nov. And he then says, Saboti, Anochi Saboti b'chol nefesh beit avicha. What's that word, Saboti? What's the root of that word?
Sabak.
Not Sabah, no.
Where is the word? I can't see it.
David, what modern Hebrew word do we know from Saboti?
Zappa, Grandpa.
No.
No.
It's David's not there.
You'll kick yourself when I tell you.
Sabak.
Siba.
Reason.
Reason. Anochi Saboti. I am the reason that all your family got killed. I am responsible for. I am the reason. It's the same word, same root of the word. Siba. Anochi Saboti b'chol nefesh beit avicha. I am responsible. I am the reason that the death of every person in your father's household took place. So that is David saying, Chatati, I'm taking responsibility. And that is the greatness of David HaMelech that we learn. He made a mistake. He made a mistake with Bathsheba as well. And he is man enough to say, Chatati, I have sinned. Now, what is the contrast to that? Of course, The contrast to David HaMelech
Is
taking
Shaul.
responsibility is Shaul. Jeffrey, expand on that, please.
Well, Shaul doesn't want to see the good in people. He wants to see bad.
Well, Shaul doesn't want to take responsibility for his actions, doesn't he? What did he say? Let's go back to chapter 15. What does he say to Shmuel when he doesn't do what he's meant to do? Look at I'm on chapter 15. Look at verse 13 on the screen.
And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, "May you be blessed of the Lord. I have fulfilled the word of the Lord." And Samuel said, "What then is this blessing of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?"
Stop there. So Shaul says, "I've done what Hashem told me. Aren't I a good boy?" And Shmuel says, "Oh yeah? Well, what's all that noise I can hear? What are all those animals? I thought you were meant to kill the animals." And what does Shaul say?
And Shaul said, "They brought them from the Amalekites, so the people had pity on the best of the sheep and the oxen, in order to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed."
Stop there. So what did he do? First of all, he
Didn't obey the command.
He disobeyed a command. And then when he's found out, what does he do?
Makes the excuse that the people did it.
He tries to make an excuse and he blames
The people.
somebody else. He blames the people. It wasn't me. You know what these people are like. I couldn't do anything. They brought them from the Amalekites. For their people had pity on the best of the sheep and the oxen. But don't worry. It's all for God. We're going to sacrifice them to Hashem. It's all fine. And Shmuel gets very angry. Verse 16.
Samuel said to Shaul, "Desist, and I shall tell you what the Lord spoke to me last night." And he said to him, "Speak."
This
And
is
Samuel...
Shmuel getting very angry. He says, "Hereh, shut up instantly. Be quiet. I'll tell you. Don't tell me any of this rubbish. You're telling me it was the people, it was this, that, and the other. Shut up, and I'll tell you what Hashem said to me." Shaul now knows he's in trouble, okay? Because he's made excuses. So the contrast here between David and Shaul is very stark. If we go back to our chapter, we've already been sent to chapter 15 by verse 19 by the fact that the pasuk uses the same words, man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and ass and lamb, with the exception of camel. So we're already got in mind from verse 19, haven't we? The whole business with Amalek. Jeffrey got it straight away. It reminds me of Amalek. Now, in verse 22, we see another contrast to chapter 15. In chapter 15, Shaul blames somebody else and does not take responsibility for something that was clearly his fault. And in verse 22 of our chapter, you have the exact opposite. David takes responsibility for something which really was not his responsibility. It was not his, at least, direct responsibility. You can argue that he had a part to play in it, but it was not entirely foreseeable by David that Doeg would come and massacre the entire city of Nov because he took Goliath's sword and a few loaves of bread. So David has done the exact opposite of Shaul. And if we go back to chapter 15, what is it that Shaul, what is it that God told Shmuel? Shmuel says, "Shut up, and I'll tell you what God told me last night." What did he tell him? Let's just get the right pasuk.
17.
Verse 28, Jeffrey, on the screen.
Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to your fellow who is better than you."
Stop there. And has given it to your fellow who is better than you. Our chapter here, chapter 22, verse 22, is where David demonstrates, at least here for the first time clearly, and clearly the author of Shmuel Aleph wants us to see this contrast, because he's already told us in verse 19 to think about the story of Amalek. David is better than Shaul. David takes responsibility even when the responsibility is not directly his. Shaul tries to get away from his responsibility even when the responsibility is directly his. There's a massive contrast between Shaul and David, and this is what Shmuel was alluding to in chapter 15 when he said, God has taken the kingdom from you and given it, doesn't just say given it to somebody else, has given it to your fellow who is better than you. So here you have that very, very clear contrast between David and Shaul. We also see when David sins with Bathsheba, that taking of responsibility. So David now takes on the responsibility, and he says in verse 23, Evyatar, stay with me, I will look after you. Look at the Hebrew words. Shva iti, stay with me. Al tira, don't be afraid. Ki asher yivakeshet nafshi yivakeshet nafshecha. He who seeks my life seeks your life. What does that make you sound to a bit like?
It sounds a bit like
Naomi and Ruth,
Ruth speaking to
Naomi
them.
and Ruth.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
sounds a bit like Naomi and Ruth, who says, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Where you go, I will go. David says, stay with me. That means where you go, I go. Or where I go, you go.
You go.
He who seeks my soul seeks your soul. In other words, our two souls are bound up together. That means where you die, I'll die. Ki mishmeret ata imadi. You will be safe here with me. This does have a ring about it of Naomi and Ruth, does it not?
Mm-hmm.
Who was Ruth?
Well, she was the great-great-grandmother of David.
She was the great, I'm not sure how many greats, three, I think.
Two.
Two, maybe. Yeah, I thought three, maybe. Anyway, we'll count them
Maybe.
up later. She was the ancestress of David. She was the ancestress of David. So here is another little hint from the author of Shmuel Aleph to David's ancestry. I thought that was a nice little idea there, right at the end of the chapter. Now, since David has put his hand up, as it were, and taken some responsibility, let's have a look at where the levels of responsibility for this massacre lie. And it's a sort of concentric sort of idea, sort of going from direct responsibility to less responsible, but still a bit responsible, etc., etc. So who's the main person responsible for this?
I would say Doeg.
Doeg, yeah, no doubt about that, Johnny. Doeg is the main person. Number one, as we've said in Tehillim, let's have a look at that Tehillim again. Okay, verse 4 on the screen, Jeffrey.
Your tongue plots destruction as a sharpened razor working deceit.
So the first one is Doeg with his tongue. He goes and splits on Achimelech and speaks Motzi Shemra. And then, of course, Doeg has the ultimate responsibility because he killed everybody. So the primary responsibility is Doeg. At the next level, who is responsible?
David.
David. I would say there's one in between.
Achimelech. Achimelech.
Johnny says Achimelech and Jeffrey says Saul. Going sort of on a reducing responsibility. Doeg's first. It's got to be Shaul next because Shaul told him to kill them all. So Shaul is like number 2 guilty. And then who's guilty after that? Who's got a responsibility? Well, David, because he admits it. He said, blast, I should have known that Doeg was going to tell Shaul, I should have done something about it, whatever that was. Maybe Michael's ultimate solution of killing Doeg, or maybe some other less violent suggestion. But either way, he should have done something about it, and he could have stopped it. So he's got a level of responsibility. Somebody said Achimelech. What was Achimelech's responsibility? Well, his responsibility is he should have been a bit more savvy, shouldn't he? He should have known that if he gives these things to David, he's going to be in trouble, and he's going to bring trouble to his household. He did suspect it because he asked David, where's all your men? Why aren't you here? And David, if you like, fooled him, or didn't fool him, and said, I'm on a king's mission. And so that is another level of responsibility. Achimelech himself. Yes, Jeffrey?
In all fairness, it does say in the text, Johnny, I'm sorry to interrupt, that Achimelech knew of David's loyalty to the king. He talks about it, and his conquests against the Philistines and
Goliath.
So
Seems a bit harsh on Achimelech.
it was very harsh on him.
Okay, I accept that. It's a sort of much lower level of responsibility. I've got another level of responsibility yet that I want to add in. David, you've unmuted. That usually means you've got something to tell us.
Can I hear what you have to say first, that I accidentally unmuted? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, my extra level of responsibility, and this is alluded to somewhere, and I saw it somewhere weeks ago, and I can't find it now, and that is Jonathan. Why is Jonathan responsible? Maybe, David, you found what I saw a few weeks ago and I can't find now. You can tell us in a minute. But why? Let's ask everybody else. Why is Jonathan responsible for this?
He's the one that got David escaping and running away.
Okay, go on. He told David to run away.
And he helped him run away, etc., etc. So,
go on.
So maybe he could have come and protected him against his father.
Maybe he could have done a little bit more. Now,
yeah, with his father,
what did David ask Achimelech for?
Bread.
Food.
And a sword.
Bread and a sword. Food and a weaponry. If Jonathan had given David, and he was perfectly capable of doing this, if he'd have given him some provisions and a weapon, he wouldn't have had to go to Achimelech in the first place. And so there is a responsibility for this whole thing that lies on Jonathan as well. Bit harsh, maybe, but the point is that one needs to think. Why didn't Jonathan think, hang on a minute, I'm sending David away here. He's got no food. He's got no provisions. He's got no weaponry. And it's in my power to provide him with those things. Jonathan did not think on, as my family used to say. You've got to think on. That was one of Jeffrey's mum's favourite sayings. You must think on, meaning think ahead. And he didn't think ahead. David, have you got a source for that?
Yes, I have. It's very disturbing. It's a quotation in the name of Rav. You'll find it in Sanhedrin Kuf Dalad Omad Aleph 104a. The topic under discussion is failure to display proper hospitality. And Rav remarks there that because Jonathan didn't display proper hospitality towards David, i.e. by supplying him with bread, just as you said, this whole tragic chain of events would never have happened. And ultimately, Jonathan and his brothers are killed with Shaul HaMelech in the incident that you described earlier.
Yeah, okay. So am I right? Is this where it's from? I've got in my mind an expression that says, but for the want of 2 loaves, the city of Nov was destroyed, meaning that had Jonathan given a couple of loaves of bread to David, the whole of the city of Nov would never have got destroyed. Is that what's mentioned in that Gemara? Is that
Exactly.
Yeah, I knew I hadn't made it up. Good, thank you for finding that for me.
Isn't that a little bit unfair for Jonathan? Because basically, unless I'm missing something, Jonathan said, "Look, if the arrow falls in one direction, it's okay. If it falls in the other direction, it's not okay." So at that juncture, before he got to that stage, he didn't know what Saul was going to say. It was only when he fired the arrows, and at that stage, I don't think he saw David anymore.
He did. They embraced and they said,
"Oh, right, okay."
Right. So what he should have done is he should have thought on, and he should have thought, if Saul, by the time he goes to shoot these arrows, right, he knows what Saul said because he's shooting the arrows to give him the sign. So when he goes off to the fields to shoot his arrows, why didn't he chap a few loaves of bread on his way? Okay. You could argue that David should have thought on as well, because he also knew there was a possibility. Why didn't he bring his own supplies? But that's another question. But I think, I mean, it is a bit harsh on Jonathan, isn't it? Because he did try to save his life. But the point is,
more than a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it is harsh. But
and I have never come across any other criticism of Yehonatan anywhere.
No, we've said that before ourselves, haven't we? That
he's probably the real hero of Shmuel Aleph.
Yeah, we have said that, and I do think it's very harsh of the Gemara, and I certainly wouldn't have thought of it on my own if I hadn't seen it I didn't see it in the source of the Gemara. Somebody quoted the Gemara, but it does. We can learn something from everything, can't we? And I think that if the Gemara has got anything to criticize Jonathan about, harsh though it may be, and very harsh though it may be, it is perhaps that we need to just think ahead. Yes, Jeffrey?
Look, when you're fleeing for your life, you don't really want to be laden down with baggage and weapons. You're running away from trouble, aren't you? And you're running to a haven. He ran to a haven. What's a better haven than a city of Kohanim?
That's why he went there. Yeah.
So he didn't. He wanted to travel light to get ahead.
Fair enough. But when he got there, that's when it all unraveled, wasn't it? Because when he got there, he didn't have any provisions. So I guess it's a balance. But anyway, that's the interesting. We're over time. Look at that. That's the interesting circles of responsibility. There's actually a final circle of responsibility, which I hesitate to tell you because I'm a bit uncomfortable with it, but I will tell it to you. And that is Hophni and Pinchas. Who remembers who they were?
Pinchas was a Cohen, wasn't it?
Yes, Cohen. Hophni and Pinchas were Cohenim.
Cohen, yeah.
Who was their father?
Eli.
Yes, Eli Cohen. And what did Hophni and Pinchas do? Well, they were naughty, weren't they? They did all sorts
the best.
Yes, they did. They were chap the meat. They raped the women. They did all sorts of naughty things, and they suffered a curse. Do you remember the curse they suffered? The curse that they suffered was that nobody in their household will live to old age. And the Mefarshim say that this massacre in Nov is that prophecy coming to fruition, and that the sins of Hophni and Pinchas were punished here in this generation of Nov. I'm not comfortable with it, but I have to tell it to you for completion, and there it is. So that is the horrible story of the city of Nov, and we, strangely enough, don't hear Shaul criticized for it at later times, but it was clearly a very awful experience, and shows Shaul's crazy behavior. So that's the end of chapter 22. We'll stop there, and next week we'll start on chapter 23, which we go back now to the story of David. We've moving from the story of Shaul now to two parallel stories, Shaul and David, and now we're going to speak a bit more about David. So any questions on today's shiur?
Well, two things. One, I'm called Jonathan, and my mother would never let me out without sandwiches and provisions.
Me too. I'm also called Jonathan. I had Marmite sandwiches every day for me.
I had Marmite as well. But what happened to Doeg? That's what I'm asking you.
What happened to Doeg?
I can't see it. I looked further on. I couldn't see anything.
Yes, we do see him further on. We do see him further on. Yes, okay. He comes back into the story later on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
No, great story, Jonathan. Thank you.
Okay, see you next week.
Johnny,
next
just
exciting installment.
An interesting point. Old age wasn't bestowed upon those defaulting Kohanim and their families. So what's the contrary to that? Because of their sins. So what's the opposite of that? Is old age bestowed on somebody because of their piety, because of their goodness, because of their mitzvot?
Possibly, we are told, aren't we? I mean, there are two mitzvot that we are told specifically you get long life for.
Kibbud av v'aim was the Kibbud av v'aim is the first one.
And the other one?
Welcoming strangers, I think.
No.
No, you said it this morning.
I'll tell you where it is. It's in this coming week's Sedra. David, do you know?
Sending away the mother bird.
Correct. Shiluach HaKen. Sending away the mother bird.
Sending away the mother bird.
Okay, so yes, now if we think about Kibbud av v'aim, we think about Kibbud av v'aim being the one that everybody knows is something that gives you long life. If we just speak for 1 minute about Jeffrey's mum, who Bli Ayin Hara is 105 and a half. Okay, in anybody's book, that is long life. Okay, there is nobody ever who did the mitzvah of Kibbud av v'aim to a higher standard than she did. Nobody. She did the mitzvah of Kibbud av v'aim unbelievably. She sacrificed her own life for her to look after her parents, her father until he died at very young age 51, and then thereafter to look after her widowed mother who lived with her entire married life, apart from 1 year. The reward for Kibbud av v'aim is very, very visible in Antilia, and I'm very, very proud of that, and it's something that we should all think about. Kibbud av v'aim. We should be telling this to our children, by the way, because you know you have to be nice to your children when they're young because they choose your nursing home when you're older. But Kibbud av v'aim, yeah, there you go. Yes, Jeffrey.
Now, the reason why I mentioned it is because she has a great fear of death and doesn't want to die. And she's very determined to try and stay alive as long as possible, even though she's not exactly having the greatest of lives. She has that fear, and I don't want her to have that fear. And I've spoken to you about it, but you actually told me something here. You've given me the illustrations, which I can now go back. And when I finish this share, I'm going to call her and give her the reasons for this longevity. And she shouldn't have the fear because she couldn't have had, it's very obvious what's been bestowed on her.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want an example of where the Torah is true, there you are. Kibbud av v'aim brings you long life.
Yeah, and I feel very blessed to be her son, I have to tell you.
I feel very blessed to be a nephew. I feel very, very blessed. And I, you know, not everybody of you knows, but obviously Jeffrey knows. I am more than a nephew. I mean, she was. Everybody actually thought she was my grandmother, because she was much older than my father, and we lived very close, next door to one another. And I always said I actually had 4 mothers. I had my own mother, I had Auntie Leah, I had my grandmother who lived next door with Auntie Leah, and I had my sister who mothered me as well. So I was very fortunate. I had 4 mothers. So that means I've got to do 4 lots of kibbud ofay.
My mum was very friendly with Leah as well.
She was.
You went
She had
travelling with
my
her.
mum had great respect for your parents.
Thank you.
And my father as well.
Yeah.
You came from a fantastic family. You are a fantastic family. True.
Good.
Right. On that wonderful note, I shall wish you all Shavua Tov.
Thank you.
See you
Stop
soon.
recording.
Johnny Shavuot Tov.